Taiwan's vice president visits Japan to pay respects to assassinated former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Abe's funeral was limited to family and close friends. We take a look at his legacy in building Taiwan-Japan relations. A record number of women are elected to Japan's upper house. So how does it compare to Taiwan's political landscape? And which country will overtake China's population next year? We take a look at the latest trends in population growth. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Liao. Taiwan's Vice President William Lai has attended the funeral of the late former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in Tokyo. The ceremony is limited to family members and those close to Abe, but members of the public have been gathering around Tokyo's Zojoji Temple to pay their respects. Abe was gunned down during a campaign speech on Friday. Japan is reeling from the shock killing, which has reverberated around the world. Lai is the highest-level Taiwan official to visit Japan since the two countries severed official ties 50 years ago. Tokyo has confirmed the visit, but says Lai is attending the funeral in a private capacity. Foreign dignitaries and leaders around the world have been paying tribute to the statesman who transformed both Japan and its place on the international stage. Ryan Hill-Kilpatrick says this report on Shinzo Abe's enduring legacy.
From all around the world, tributes to Shinzo Abe have been flooding in. From Taiwan, which considered Abe a friend and a supporter of its democracy.
南北前首相是深受国际推崇的国际领袖，毕生致力于维护民主、自由、人权的价值。
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken made an unscheduled trip to Tokyo while traveling in Asia to offer Washington's condolences. The U.S. considers Japan a key ally in the region.
He was deeply committed to strengthening the alliance and friendship between the United States and Japan, and pursuing an open and free Indo-Pacific region.
Abe was the architect of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or Quad, a strategic security forum that brought together Japan, the US, Australia, and India.
शिंजो आबे जी भारत के जनमन में सालों तक बसे रहेंगे.
Japan has lost a true patriot and a true leader. And Australia has lost a true friend.
Abe was shot during a campaign speech in the city of Nara on July 7th. The assassination shocked Japanese society and prompted an outpouring of grief and praise for a statesman who left his country's position on the world stage transformed.
One of the things that he will be remembered for the most is for changing the global posture of Japan, especially when it comes to security, diplomacy, and defense issues, especially in the region. When he came to power, Japan was a rather inconsequential actor, I would say, on those fronts. And he always dreamt of making Japan a more important actor.
Abe will be remembered as a tireless diplomat. During his second and final term in office, from 2012 to 2020, he visited more than 176 countries and regions.
He was very important in drawing the region closer together. He was very active in diplomacy. He made more than 80 trips abroad, which was a very high rate of diplomacy, of trips abroad.
But not everyone backed Abe as he carved out a bigger role for Japan. Many at home opposed his moves to loosen post-war restrictions on Japan's defense forces. His refusal to acknowledge Japan's wartime atrocities weighed on strained relations with China and made him a resented figure in South Korea.
There's no doubt that during the record-breaking tenure of Abe, when he was in office for about 8 years, there were frictions certainly reached a higher level. He often was accused of beautifying the history of Japan, especially during World War II and before World War II. China and Japan, of course, are bound to be rival. They both have very different goals for the region. When it comes to South Korea, I think there are some efforts right now to mend fences between the two sides.
Both his supporters and critics agree. Abe brought Tokyo back to the global stage in a way unseen for decades. The passing of Japan's longest-serving prime minister leaves an indelible mark, not only on his own country, but the whole world. Ryan Hill-Kilpatrick for TaiwanPlus.
While Japan and Taiwan do not have formal diplomatic relations, Abe was seen as a staunch supporter of Taiwan in the face of China's rising aggression. He was popular among politicians and the public, many of whom paid tribute at a memorial set up at the de facto Japanese embassy in Taipei. For over a century, Taiwan and Japan have shared a close link, but one which has left a complicated legacy. While many remember the injustices of Japan's 50 years of colonial rule, others look back on the era with nostalgia. For a deeper look at Taipei-Tokyo relations, our reporter Ryan Ho Kilpatrick spoke with historian James Lin of the University of Washington.
Do you think it's fair to say that a lot of this goodwill comes from a certain degree of nostalgia about the age of Japanese rule as well?
Probably the largest factor still is the more contemporary one, which is that Abe has been a very vocal proponent of Taiwan on the international stage. But I do think that there's this strand of Taiwanese society that feels a great deal of affinity. And I think it goes back to the 90s. Under Kuomintang rule, Japan was demonized as kind of this colonial power that was rapacious and didn't treat Taiwan very well. But with democratization, starting in the 90s, especially in the 2000s, with the opening up of the education curriculum, there became a more public space for revisiting Taiwan's history under Japanese colonial rule. An opportunity to be nostalgic about that period, because that was the period when Japanese rule was kind of at its most thriving in terms of the economy, in terms of the safety that it offered for Taiwanese people. And so I think that part of that affinity continues into how Taiwanese society sees important Japanese political figures like Abe.
What do you think it is about that era that people look back fondly upon, despite all the implications of being colonial subjects at the time?
Part of it has to do with the generational divide. That a good example that was raised by a number of scholars is Li Denghui, who was the first freely elected president of Taiwan. Li Denghui is someone who has been very public about his affinity for Japanese rule. He's of that generation. He was a teenager when he was living under Japanese rule, went to secondary higher education in Japan, and he came back as an adult to Taiwan, and then he was met with Kuomintang rule. And Kuomintang rule was very repressive during that period. And people like Li, they kind of remember their youth being something that was, Taiwan had economically prospered. It was a very safe society. And then all of a sudden they were met by this very repressive regime. And so I think that a lot of it has to do with a certain kind of memory about, what it was like when you were a teenager during these kind of the halcyon or the best part of Japanese rule. And then you meet the worst part of Kuomintang rule that immediately follows it.
Well, in a symbol of the close ties between the two countries, Japan has ordered 3 tons of Taiwan's grouper fish, which was banned by China last month. The Pingtung County Magistrate held a moment of silence for Japan's former leader Shinzo Abe at the signing ceremony for the agreement. The first batch of frozen shipment will be sold in Yamaguchi Prefecture, Abe's hometown. 30 tons of live fish will be exported at the end of the month. Pingtung County has the largest grouper production in the country. The local government has been looking for alternative export markets after the Chinese ban.
透过视讯来跟日本的买方，或是我们在同时台湾的安倍自由会的会长陈昂山，我们共同来视讯见证，更期待，因为在这个悲欢交集之余，我们18年终于可以外销到日本。
Deputy Taipei Mayor Tsai Bing-kun is in intensive care after suffering a stroke late Monday. Tsai collapsed during a dinner party he was attending along with Taipei's Mayor Ko Wen-je. He was taken to hospital where doctors performed emergency surgery. He is in stable condition but is being kept sedated. Doctors say they will observe his condition for the next week. Coming up after the break, families taking the train in southern Taiwan are getting some special onboard entertainment. We'll have the details.
A beautiful yellowfin tuna. 我放下来太重了。没吃过猪肉，才看到猪脚肉啊。Very nice.
OK，
好。
Good local time, everyone. Welcome to Innovative Minds with Audrey Tong.
Ask about what is communism, and what I remember as a 9-year-old, they said the people who come in the middle of the night, stuff you and your family into a cattle car and ship you to Siberia, which was kind of an interesting response. That if the big worldwide task of the second half of the 20th century was building transport infrastructure, railroads, ports, big highways to get commerce moving, then the big task facing Western societies, or all societies, frankly, actually, is the digitization of public services to make them more efficient. I mean, the idea ultimately would be government as a service rather than as an obligation. In Estonia's case, that we have reciprocal transparency so that people can look at my property records, but I can see who's looking at them, which of course makes it all a little more responsible. Hello, I'm Thomas Hendrik Gilbert. See you on TaiwanPlus.
I'm Audrey Tong. See you on TaiwanPlus.
Thanks for watching TaiwanPlus. For more great stories from here in Taiwan and around the world, please download the TaiwanPlus app.
Welcome back. You're watching Taiwan Plus News. Here's a reminder of our top story. Taiwan's vice president has attended the funeral of Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in Tokyo. The ceremony is limited to family members and those close to Abe. Now, Japan voted in their upper house elections on Sunday, just 2 days after the assassination of Abe. The 67-year-old former leader had been campaigning for the ruling Liberal Democratic Party when he was shot. The LDP and its coalition swept to a supermajority in parliament. The results also showed a record number of women gaining seats. But as Louise Watt reports, Japan still lags behind Taiwan.
Japan's Prime Minister marking expected winners of Sunday's elections. When the final votes were tallied, of 125 upper house seats, 35 were won by women, a record number. It's seen as reflecting gradual change in a country where men dominate the political landscape, especially as a record number of female candidates also stood.
They really shake up Japanese politics, and I think they really have paved the way for what Japanese politics might look like in the future in terms of, where women are in Japanese politics. So I'm very hopeful about that.
It's not just Japan with a political culture seen as hostile to women. Over in South Korea, many women felt misogyny was at play in the country's recent presidential elections, with the man who later won pledging to abolish the country's Ministry of Gender Equality and Family. He said it promotes policies unfair to men. But things are different in neighbour Taiwan, which leads the way in Asia. Its percentage of women in the national parliament is even higher than a lot of Western countries.
43% of Taiwan's legislators are women, and this is the presidential palace, where currently the highest elected woman in the land sits.
And unlike the dozen other female leaders in Asia in recent decades, President Tsai Ing-wen doesn't follow a father, brother, or husband into power. Observers say Taiwan's vibrant history of women's activism and gender quotas have helped get more women into office. But even Tsai has faced barriers.
single woman without a family, she has certainly experienced a lot of gender-based discrimination, right, throughout her campaigns. For example, when she was running for her first presidential term, even the men in her own party questioned her ability, right? They questioned whether or not someone like her, a woman who wears a skirt, even though we never really see Tsai Ing-wen in a skirt, whether or not a woman could be the commander-in-chief.
And there are more women in the commander-in-chief's office.
Yeah.
Kulas Yotaka has served as the president's spokesperson for 2 years and wants to see more women at the highest levels of government.
It's very important and it's encouraging. Now so many women would think, oh, why not? Maybe I can do something important, something big like President Tsai.
Kulas will soon step down to run for office herself as the first indigenous magistrate or highest county official of Hualien on Taiwan's east coast.
As a woman, especially an indigenous woman, there are too many stereotypes and restrictions imposed on me. Running for election, I can actually bring a new perspective to Hualien. That's what I think, and not just for Hualien, and also in Taiwan.
Taiwan is already seen as a regional role model for gender representation. But even those who broke the barriers feel more needs to be done for a fairer, more diverse political landscape. Asnaya Zhou, Piper Yo, and Louise Watt for TaiwanPlus.
India is on track to become the world's most populous nation in 2023, overtaking China. That's according to the latest United Nations report. The global population is expected to hit 8 billion by mid-November. It also found that the world's population is growing older because of increasing life expectancy and falling fertility rates. This has resulted in the slowest rate of population growth since 1950. Our reporter Bing Wong takes an in-depth look at the global growth trend.
The world population is rapidly approaching 8 billion people. Wow, right? In just 11 years, the number of people went up by 1 billion. The global population is growing faster than ever. We only reached the first billion in 1800. Then it took 127 years to reach the second billion. The next 33 years to reach 3 billion. And we've grown by 1 billion every decade since. Experts say the rapid growth is due to better medicine and access to food. It's helped extend lifespans, lower maternal and child mortality rates. But with the growing population, the number of refugees is also rising. The UN reports that 100 million people are displaced from their homes. That's because of regional conflicts, persecution, and violations of human rights. Since the start of the Ukraine war, there are around 6 million more refugees. And here in Taiwan, the population has declined for the second year straight, falling by almost 200,000 from the year before. The Ministry of National Development projects that the country's population will shrink to between 14.5 million and 17 million by 2070. That's down from 23.5 million right now. For more on Taiwan's population, I spoke with Alice Chang, a population expert from Academia Sinica, Taiwan's top research institute.
Why is Taiwan considered an aging population, and why has the population declined in recent years?
When there's a very rapid expansion of education, particularly among the female population, it really changed their life course and the way they looked at marriage and career. So like all the other developed countries who has gone through this kind of demographic transition, once the average educational level increased, and also because of this increases in living standard that comes with industrialization and then post-industrialization, with better living standards and even a knowledge economy, people started to think about what they should do to have the kind of quote-unquote quality children. So they tend to limit the total number of children they have. And at the same time, what we see is this increased longevity among the older population, both because of better medicine and better health care.
The Taiwanese government has been giving subsidies for families with children. What else can Taiwan do to stabilize its population?
What we're seeing now is that the policies, they don't seem quite effective in terms of helping more young couples enter marriage or to help them have more children. What we're seeing is the unmarried population has been increasing. And so it's a very difficult question in terms of what we can do to stabilize the population. In the long run, the total number of women in reproductive ages, it's much smaller now. So even they are willing to have 3 children, you still cannot make up the population loss or the total babies that can be born to bigger cohort of women in the past. But if you really want to try to say something, I would say that maybe we need some kind of replacement migration. But in the East Asian context, this is quite difficult to do because across all East Asian advanced economies, it is really not an immigrant-friendly context.
Kiribati has announced it's leaving the Pacific Islands Forum, a key diplomatic group in the region. The surprise withdrawal comes just before the forum's first in-person meeting since the start of the COVID pandemic. The country's president says he is unhappy with the forum's Secretary General and his treatment of Micronesian countries. But the leader of Kiribati's opposition says pressure from China was the real reason behind the decision. Kiribati has been aligned with Beijing since switching diplomatic recognition from Taipei in 2019. China has firmly denied the accusation. It comes as the forum is due to discuss a broad trade and security agreement proposed by Beijing. The foreign minister of Tuvalu, one of Taiwan's 4 remaining Pacific allies, says regional leaders are aware of the growing geopolitical tensions.
The geopolitical competition and tug of war that we're seeing right now between China and US. And I think that the general theme of many of the interventions from the members is that the Pacific really needs to define their future themselves and the terms on which we will engage China, US, and some of the bigger Western countries.
People across Shanghai are facing the prospect of new strict COVID curbs just weeks after the city exited a punishing months-long lockdown. Local officials have insisted that there are no plans to reinforce citywide restrictions despite a wave of compulsory testing last week. But some residents in the city told TaiwanPlus that their communities have already re-entered lockdown. China officially recorded just 347 cases of COVID-19 on Monday. Taiwan recorded a total of 31,000 local COVID infections on Tuesday. 2 more domestic cases of the highly infectious BA.5 Omicron strain of coronavirus were also confirmed on Monday. A couple in the southern county of Pingtung tested positive for the subvariant after picking up their son from the airport. The couple have been placed in quarantine and another family member has so far tested negative. Taiwan has now confirmed a total of 4 domestic BA.5 cases. Scientists are raising concerns about the ease of transmission of BA.5 and another subvariant, BA.4. They are driving a wave of new infections around the world and are better at evading vaccine immunity. Traveling with children can be tough. It's hard to keep kids entertained on long trips. But certain trains in southern Taiwan are livening up otherwise boring journeys with some special performances. Eric Gao takes a look.
Parents and children taking the train in southern Taiwan are getting a special treat. After a 2-year break because of the COVID-19 pandemic, performers are entertaining traveling families once again.
上这个列车，然后参与整个参与的一个互动。那今年又搭配这个交通部观光局的这个铁道年，所以呢，我们把时空列车以及这个铁道年结合在一起，也是扣合我们在推动的这个流动艺术飨宴。
The performances are a big hit with travelers.
我很喜欢这次的活动，因为它让我们有体验到猜谜，也有让我们跟那些角色互动。
车程有1个小时，可是因为有这样的一个活动，有一些推谜的一些游戏，那其实现场热络气氛很快，我就觉得好像才过20分钟，结果我们就到诗营了。
Just like a real time machine, these performances make time fly. Patrick Chen and Eric Gao for TaiwanPlus.
NASA has released an image that's being hailed as the deepest peek into the early universe so far. Taken by the James Webb Space Telescope, it shows a cluster of galaxies as it appeared more than 13 billion years ago. That's how long it's taken the light in the image to reach Earth. In cosmic terms, that's not long after the theoretical Big Bang. This is the first image released from the $9 billion telescope, which launched late last year. U.S. President Joe Biden unveiled the photo on Monday as a preview for a larger set of visuals due to be released on Tuesday. The James Webb Space Telescope is the world's biggest and most powerful. It will explore the origins of the universe and examine planets that might be habitable. Thanks for watching Taiwan Plus News. I'm Leslie Liao. Finally today, we leave you with the Light and Water Show from the southern branch of Taiwan's National Palace Museum to commemorate Japanese former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, please download the Taiwan Plus app. Stay safe and see you next time.